The judge looked up from her paperwork, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "So you're claiming this property isn't even part of your neighborhood?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular courtroom skepticism that tend to unsettle attorneys. On the opposite side, Susan Vance hesitated, her face paling beneath her perfectly styled bob. "Well, Your Honor, technically the boundaries are somewhat ambiguous, and we believe historically the intent was always to include all nearby properties within the Oakage Pines HOA jurisdiction. Additionally, we have documentation suggesting previous owners may have verbally agreed to certain community rules, implying an unofficial acceptance of HOA authority." At that moment, murmurs spread through the courtroom as I calmly reached into my briefcase and placed a document onto the table. "The property survey is official, certified, and indisputable. Your Honor," I said quietly, "this is the verified county survey from 1997. My land sits exactly 112 feet outside the HOA boundary." The judge studied it for a few seconds before speaking. "Case dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Vance, you will cover all court costs. But let me go back and explain how this all started. 6 months earlier, I had moved into what I believed was my dream home, 5 acres of wooded peace, surrounded by nature, offering a level of silence you can't put a price on. The property sat at the end of a long dirt road known as Willow Creek Road, isolated, almost hidden from the world. Just beyond my eastern border, the uniform rows of Oakage pines began, with identical houses and perfectly trimmed lawns. Everything was peaceful for exactly 3 days. That was when Susan showed up. I was unpacking boxes in my garage when I heard the sharp click of heels striking concrete. I turned to see a woman in her 50s, dressed as though she were heading to a corporate meeting rather than the countryside. She carried a thick envelope and wore a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said cheerfully, though her tone suggested anything but warmth. "I'm Susan Vance, head of the Oakage Pines HOA. I brought your welcome packet, community rules, and your first dues invoice." I wiped my hands on my jeans and accepted the envelope, more out of politeness than interest. "Thanks, but I think there's been a mistake. I don't live in Oakage Pines. This is Willow Creek Road, and there's no HOA here." Her smile tightened. "Oh, I think you'll find that every property in this area falls under our jurisdiction. We recently expanded our boundaries to maintain community standards." I couldn't help but laugh. "Ma'am, you can't just expand boundaries like that. That's not how property law works. I chose this home specifically because it had no HOA." Her voice sharpened instantly. "We'll see about that. In the meantime, I notice your mailbox isn't standard black. You'll need to replace it within 30 days or face a $50 fine." "My mailbox is on my property, which isn't part of your HOA," I said calmly, as if explaining something obvious. "Have a good day, Mrs. Vance." She stood there for a moment, clearly not used to being dismissed. Then she turned sharply and walked back toward her territory, her heels striking the pavement with frustration. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. She was completely beyond reasoning. Her face shifted into a deep violet shade. "You think you're very clever, don't you?" she snapped. "Well, let me make something clear, Mr. Hayes. I've been running this HOA for 12 years. No one challenges me and walks away untouched. No one. I'm not challenging you," I replied calmly. "I'm just living on my own property. You know, the land that isn't your HOA." She stormed off in anger, but not before snapping several photos of my construction site. I simply gestured at her as she left and returned to my work. After that, the neighborhood rumor mill lit up instantly. Every time I went into town for supplies, I could feel people whispering. Apparently, Susan had been telling anyone who would listen that I was a problem resident, refusing to cooperate, and lowering property values by rejecting community standards. The strange part was that I actually got along well with the real Oakage Pines residents near the boundary. A few quietly admitted they thought Susan was going too far, but none of them wanted to oppose her openly. Susan had a reputation for making life difficult for anyone who didn't fall in line. Then came the so-called legal notices from her attorney. I call it that because I'm almost certain she wrote them herself. They were filled with dramatic legal phrases used incorrectly, along with vague threats about pursuing every possible legal remedy available. That's when I started documenting everything. Every visit, every notice, every violation slip. I installed cameras around my property, positioned carefully to capture any future appearances from Susan or her supporters. Then the certified mail arrived on a Tuesday. It was a real lawsuit. Susan Vance and the Oak Pines HOA were suing me for three things: failure to pay $3,600 in alleged HOA dues, multiple violations totaling $5,000 in penalties, and damages of $20,000 for supposedly reducing neighborhood property values. They also demanded legal fees. The claim stated my land had been mistakenly excluded from the HOA due to an administrative error and was now being corrected. Most people would have panicked. I laughed. Then I called my cousin Diane, who happened to be a property attorney. She actually filed suit against you? Diane asked after I explained everything. For land that isn't even in her HOA? Yep. She's claiming it was accidentally left out? Diane's laughter echoed through the phone. Oh, this is going to be fun. Send me everything you've got. I went further than that. I visited the county archives and pulled certified copies of everything: original subdivision maps, HOA formation documents, official boundary records, and historical land surveys dating back decades. It was all there in black and white. My property had never been part of the HOA. There was no mistake, no ambiguity. Susan hadn't discovered an error. She had simply decided to expand her influence and pick my land as her first target. The court date came sooner than expected. I arrived dressed neatly, briefcase in hand, calm and fully prepared. Diane offered to represent me, but I chose to handle it myself. This was personal. Susan arrived with her entourage: 2 board members, a man who appeared to be their lawyer, and stacks of documents that could barely fit on a table. She wore a business suit that screamed authority and a smug expression that suggested she already believed she had won. The judge, Honorable Eleanor Brooks, looked like she had already dealt with far too many HOA disputes in her career. Susan's side went first. Her attorney, an actual lawyer, though not a particularly impressive one, delivered a long speech about community unity, neighborhood standards, and the HOA's belief that my property should have been included from the beginning. He presented exhibits: photos of my shed, violation notices, a hand-drawn map that looked like it was made in a hurry, and statements from board members about maintaining uniform rules. What he did not present was any actual legal proof. When it was my turn, I stood and opened my briefcase. Your Honor, I have only one exhibit. I placed the certified county survey onto the bench. This is the official 1997 county map from when Oak Pines HOA was established. As clearly shown, my property, lot 473,891, clearly marked beyond the HOA boundary, 112 feet outside it, to be exact. The judge studied the document carefully, her eyes tracing every line. Mrs. Vance, do you have any evidence that contradicts this official survey? Susan shot up so fast she knocked over her water glass. Your Honor, we maintain that the original intent was to include all neighboring properties. And furthermore, I didn't ask about intent or beliefs. The judge interrupted sharply. I asked whether you have any evidence that disputes this official survey. Susan's attorney leaned in and whispered urgently, but she brushed him aside. The issue here, Your Honor, is that this man is deliberately undermining our community rules. He built an unauthorized structure, refuses to maintain his property according to our standards, and has encouraged others to question HOA authority. Because I don't belong to your HOA, I said calmly, I can't undermine authority that doesn't apply to me. The judge looked between us, clearly unimpressed. Mrs. Vance, are you seriously telling this court you filed a lawsuit against someone for violating HOA rules when they are not even part of your HOA? It's a principle, Susan snapped. If we allow people to live right next to us without following standards, it sets a dangerous precedent. The dangerous precedent, the judge said slowly, will be allowing HOA to enforce rules over land it does not govern. She turned slightly toward me. Mr. Hayes, are you making any counterclaims? Yes, Your Honor. I am requesting compensation for harassment, baseless litigation, and legal fees. The judge nodded once. I've heard enough. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Vance and the Oakage Pines HOA have no jurisdiction over Mr. Hayes, and therefore cannot enforce any rules or penalties against him. This lawsuit is a clear abuse of process. She turned directly to Susan. You are personally responsible for Mr. Hayes' legal costs. Additionally, I am imposing a $5,000 penalty for frivolous litigation. Any further harassment will result in criminal referral. Do you understand? Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again like a fish out of water. I'll take that as a yes, the judge said. Court is adjourned. The entire hearing lasted less than 30 minutes from the moment I presented the survey. I walked out of that courtroom feeling completely vindicated. Susan followed behind me, her group scattering like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Her face had shifted from violet to pale, then to a sickly gray I didn't think was possible. A week later, I was drinking my morning coffee on the porch when I noticed someone walking up my driveway. I tensed, expecting another confrontation, but relaxed when I recognized Mark Sterling, one of the Oakage Pines residents I had grown friendly with. Morning, Mark. I called out. Coffee. No time, he said, climbing the steps and handing me an envelope. Just wanted to give you this personally. I opened it and found a formal document. Termination of the Oakage Pines Homeowners Association was printed at the top in bold letters. Below it were dozens of signatures. After the court case, people started talking. Mark explained about Susan's control, the fines, the pressure tactics. And then we realized if she's willing to sue someone who isn't even in the HOA, what's stopping her from doing worse to us? I scanned the pages. More than 60% of homeowners had already signed. We're holding a special vote next week, he added. She's already been removed from a board. Turns out she was using HOA funds for legal battles. That was a final straw. I handed the document back. I can't sign this. I'm not part of your HOA. Mark smiled faintly. We know, but somehow you did what none of us could. You took her down from outside the system. As he walked back down my driveway, I couldn't help but smile. I had moved here for peace and quiet, and somehow ended up in a legal war with a power-hungry HOA president instead. But in the end, I got my peace back, and the neighborhood got its freedom. Not bad for someone who never even joined the HOA. The final result came a month later. The vote to dissolve passed with 78% approval. Susan's legal troubles were only beginning. The state attorney general opened an investigation into misuse of HOA funds. She lost her job at the property management company once the case went public online. The last I heard, she was facing up to 5 years in prison for fraud and significant financial penalties. When investigators came to speak with me, they mentioned she broke down in tears, insisting she only wanted to maintain community standards. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to HOA Conflicts for